Lyelin 12.2, March 27th, 2311 AD. It often paid to be Emma Carter's friend, but not like this. Emma had been invited to undergo the blessing, and Emma had insisted that Rosa, her lifelong friend and live-in nurse, be allowed to forego the lottery and buy-in option and also receive the blessing, and Daniel Dwyer had agreed to it. Rosa was beside herself with joy. Recognition for Emma and her contributions to society had catapulted in the last 13 days due to the fact that she had saved thousands of people who would have otherwise died 5 days ago using her predictive powers. She had jumped out of bed and, with Rosa trailing her, had walked in a beeline to a coffee shop where Hugo Lear, an emissary of Daniel Dwyer, was having coffee. She burst through the door in her disheveled barefoot state, looked Hugo right in the eye, and then said, "Hugo, I need to speak with Daniel or thousands of people are going to die," just as plain as she could. More than a little surprised, he hesitantly said, "Wait, first, how do you know my name, and how is it that you know I'm an emissary?" The coffee shop attendant, somewhat in disbelief, said, "My man, that's Emma Carter." Perturbed by the delay, she walked right up to Hugo Lear, never breaking eye contact between her vacant eyes and his. "That's right, I'm Emma Carter. I'm the blind fortune teller, right? Get Daniel out here now. This is not a game." Being an emissary of Daniel Dwyer was a prestigious position, and Hugo carried a heaving pompousness about him, but he was a bit humbled in her presence. She was powerful, and though she did not throw that power around, she had a commanding presence in the company of anyone. Hugo, only slightly intimidated, decided he had better do his duty rather than to debate the severity of her need to speak with Daniel, and very calmly and politely replied, "My apologies, Miss Carter. I did not recognize you right away. You caught me off guard. Most people go to the station to report issues, and I am not even in uniform. Of course you may absolutely speak with him. Thousands dead, you say?" "Well," she sassed him, lofting a hand to her hip, "not if you hurry the hell up." "Of course," Hugo said, and he sat down on the floor and placed his hands in his lap and closed his eyes. A few very tense, very silent, very long moments passed. All but one of the few patrons and employees of the coffee shop had their various recording devices centered on Emma and the emissary. When Daniel Dwyer spoke through his emissaries, what one would hear was an amalgamation of his voice and that of the persons he was using. It was Hugo's voice spoken with Daniel's tone and inflection that they would hear. Daniel's voice was always distinctive under the surface of the sound, irrespective of which of his thousands of emissaries he was communicating through. The container, the vessel itself, their bodies, also seemed to transform somewhat. They would take on his movements and mannerisms, and they would even end up kind of looking like him, a bit like how a dog looks like its owner after a while. "Emma Carter," Daniel looked up at her through Hugo's eyes. "Thank you. Please tell me now what is going to happen and how we may avert this disaster." "There is no sidestepping this one, Daniel," she said. "There is going to be a volcanic eruption, a huge one. There is a whole town that will need to be evacuated." "That is terrible." Daniel stood and smiled Daniel's smile. "Tell me where, so that I may save them." "I can't flat out tell you with all these people recording me," she gestured around the coffee shop. "It'll cause a panic. But I can let you know where it is. Just open your ears and listen. The next sentence I'm going to say at the same time as a little girl who lives in the city you must save. When you hear us both say it at the same time, you will know that that's the one you need to take care of, okay?" "Very well," he said. A hushed murmur broke out in the small crowd, and everyone intently aimed their devices at the scene before quickly falling dead silent again. The sounds from the coffee shop's air conditioner and the hum and whir of other devices in operation in the shop suddenly became very noticeable. Rosa had both of her hands covering her mouth, a little shocked by what she was witnessing, despite her daily interactions with Emma and having long since become accustomed to the bizarre lives they lived, made what they were by her friend and ward's strange abilities. For they lived a very privileged life, and sometimes Emma said the darndest things. Emma had advised Daniel Dwyer of numerous causes that had required his intervention in the past, but nothing like this. This was big. It felt to the crowd that they waited forever for her to speak, though it was just a few seconds. Then she said, "Monica doesn't like flowers. She says that they make her cry and sneeze because of the dust or something like that that's in them. Something like that." Hundreds of miles away, Daniel heard her, and his shadow turned as if to face her. A little girl looking at a picture of flowers in a book with her friend, sitting on the bare floor of a little house that lived in the shadow of a great black mountain. He took a moment to think. Then he dropped his smile and said, "The world owes you a debt of gratitude beyond measure. They will be saved thanks to you, Emma Carter. I will begin relocating them now. When does this happen?" 8 days, she said, "as far ahead as I can see. I woke up to it this morning, only, 8 days from now, but I can already see it. You do save them all, and with time to spare too. You are a true blessing, Daniel Dwyer. The reports of destruction from the volcano now include 0 casualties. The gratitude is all mine, and that of the people, to be sure, he said, resuming his seated, cross-legged position on the floor, readying himself to transition from Hugo's body and return it to its rightful owner. The evacuation has already begun. She shook her head and smiled at him, admittedly a bit more smitten with him after every interaction they have, this one being no exception. I know, she said. I see that too. Good job. That was 13 days ago. The vision was still awash in her soul. So many dead, dying, injured and frightened, and Daniel, desperate to save them, but being forced to abandon so many. A whole city lost in a matter of an hour, with easily half of its population dead or dying, hundreds of thousands of the spirits of Daniel soaring about the carnage in a vain attempt to rescue them, but for all his power found unable to reconcile the fearsome strength of Mother Nature. This is what she had seen. This wasn't some problem resulting from mechanical failure or some easily circumvented accident, nor anything close to the kind of problem she typically helped with. This was Daniel Dwyer versus the earth itself. If she were to have allowed it to happen and had not intervened, he would have lost, as would have had so many innocents. They were now less than a day away from receiving the blessing. Rosa was ecstatic, and one would have thought that Emma would be too, but she was in truth frightened. Daniel Dwyer not only has the ability to look into a person's past, he can also commune with them and show them their lives, every moment of their lives from the rise of their consciousness up until the moment that their communion with him commenced. This service is what is known as the blessing. People are entered into a lottery to undergo the blessing, should they so choose, based solely on the merit of their deeds as determined by Daniel Dwyer. Any admirable act, all great gestures of kindness, any display of selflessness without any underlying ulterior motive or ill intent is rewarded by an entry into the lottery. Otherwise, one can buy their way to a blessing, but it comes with a hefty price tag. All of the money acquired during the service of a blessing is utilized to better society and aid those in need. All of this is facilitated by Daniel Dwyer, the man who can be in thousands of places all at once. Ordinarily, there were allowed only 10 blessings per day worldwide, more if a blessing was purchased, which was seldom. But because of recent events, Daniel had decided that he would allow for 2 more tomorrow, so that Emma and Rosa may experience the blessing without upsetting the lottery schedule. The blessing was often spoken of by those that had experienced it as a life-altering experience, that they would see themselves and the world around them with new and better eyes afterward, and become altogether more fulfilled for it. Emma, with her power to know the future, did not like what she was experiencing. She could not see past tomorrow, because 8 days from now, relative to her forthcoming blessing, she was still in her mother's womb. Emma was scared. She was considering backing out and giving up this opportunity to subdue her fear, but every time she played out a version of the coming days where she's chickened out, she sorely regrets it. So her choice was between facing her newfound fear of undergoing the blessing or going home and, for the rest of her life, if not just for the foreseeable future, regretting having not done it. She was going to do it. She was resolved to do it, but that didn't contain her fear response. Her resolve did not subside the notion that she felt helpless living as everyone else did, uncertain of the future. She found some solace in Rosa pointing out that she herself had been just fine her whole life with no advanced knowledge of the future, but her anxiety deepened as the time of her blessing grew ever nearer, and her window into the future narrowed. She felt as though she were being stripped bare, losing a little more of her shelter with each passing moment. She confided in Rosa how frightened she was that she couldn't see past tomorrow. Rosa's mostly ineffective attempts to comfort her were not unappreciated, but Emma shortly decided that she didn't want to talk about it anymore, and Rosa complied. The rest of the evening was much more pleasant, but in spite of finishing the day with uplifting conversation, she still hardly slept a wink that night. She could not shake the sense of helplessness that gripped her. She just had a bad feeling about tomorrow, even though she had no reasoning for it. Emotion and logic are not the best of bedfellows on any day, let alone this one. But if she had only listened to that inner voice, the millions might have been saved. Tomorrow is the day that would come to be known by the short-lived survivors as Armageddon, and she could have stopped it, if only she hadn't let her curiosity overcome her sense of apprehension. Tomorrow the world would learn the name of her true self, and henceforth tremble at an utterance of the name of Lylin. Discontented by visions of the future wherein she was invariably trapped in her mother's womb while undergoing the blessing, she would find only unrest that night. Fearful of the future for the first time since she was a child, Emma Carter took little solace in her friend's assurances that tomorrow would be wonderful, the events of which would suffice only to serve as evidence that it pays to listen to one's intuition. The very last thing that Emma said to Rosa before they said goodnight and retired to the double beds in their hotel room was that she feared something terrible was going to happen. Rosa had smiled and offered a final reassurance for the night, insisting that Emma was simply nervous because the blessing temporarily robbed her of her knowledge of the future. Emma, having come to the same conclusion herself, smiled in return, but secretly remained fearful. For the first time since she had acquired her power, and had so early on condemned it, simply so that she could enjoy the blessing as do all others who receive it, she wished that she was normal. The thought passed thoroughly as she remembered how much she otherwise cherished her gift. Still, an innate fear would walk in lockstep with her through the museum exhibits, up to the emissary chambers, and into his presence tomorrow. 14 hours, almost to the minute, and she would be there. No one would ever bid her a good night again, nor would anyone ever again will anything good for her at all, save for Hemhut, save for her great love. For tomorrow Emma Carter would be gone, and Lylin will have taken her place. It was as it should be. It was as Lylin had designed it, the fruits of 10 lifetimes of labor. Emma was fairly convinced, particularly since she had seen the future change on several occasions due to her involvement, nearly certain that she had free will. However, in truth, her decision to undergo the blessing had been made on her behalf thousands of years earlier, and by Lylin. Everything Emma ever did, every choice or decision she ever made had been predetermined, in spite of her gift to see and change the future. This was Lylin's world. It was only masquerading as Emma's and Daniel's. This truth would sear the throats of the non-believers tomorrow, who would learn shortly thereafter the consequences of sharing a world with such creatures as them. The novelty of beings like Daniel and Emma would give way to fear of something so obviously dangerous as they come to witness yesterday's playthings become tools of pain and destruction. They would be defenseless when Daniel, their guardian and savior, is forced to turn on them. It was just as it should be, and will be just as it shall.